Hello, welcome to the Wildline Podcast. I'm your host, Dan. This is a podcast about movies and how much money they make at the box office. Today is a very special day. It is the Avengers Endgame episode where we recap its opening weekend. We all sort of knew that this movie was going to do quite well. I think we all assumed it was going to break the opening weekend record. But when these numbers started coming in, it was a what the flying fuck moment for everybody. If you're in the industry, if you followed it or anything, everybody was just, I think, confounded by how well this movie is doing. Going into the weekend, I had guessed 264 last weekend. I changed my number to 280 something, I think. And that was kind of in line with what Disney was predicting. $300 million I thought was like, a possibility, but probably not likely. This film has just gone beyond anybody's imagination of what a film can do in an opening weekend. Just to give you the latest numbers that just came in about a half hour ago, it is now estimated to be doing $350 million in its opening weekend in the domestic market alone. Worldwide this weekend, $1.2 billion. And those are just like paradigm shift numbers. Like, the industry will never be the same now. This is even different than when Avengers opened up to over $200 million back in 2012. That was a big moment. When Force Awakens opened, this is so much bigger than both of those moments, because this is something that people didn't even think was possible. Didn't even think was mathematically possible that a movie could do this well on opening weekend. We're talking $109 million single day take on a Saturday. Like, that's just, no one had even considered that until this weekend. And so Avengers Endgame is an absolutely historic moment for the movie theater business in the last 50 years, at least. And we'll walk through, here's what we're going to do. We're going to walk through the numbers day by day. We're going to walk through the scores that people gave it, what the critics were thinking, the demographics. Then we'll talk about some of the historical records that it has broken. And there's like a list of 1,000. I'm not going to go through all of them. I'll go through the big ones. And then we're going to talk about how this opening is going to change the industry overall. And I think it will be a paradigm shift. It will completely upend how the industry works, what sort of movies they make. And just the business will just be totally different moving forward. Okay, so let's just dive into the numbers here. Thursday night, it comes in at 60 million previews for Endgame. That was 3 million above Force Awakens. So when that number came in, it was like, oh wow, this is going to be great, right? But it didn't necessarily feel like, $350 million was in play. That just didn't seem possible as of Thursday night, Friday morning. When the numbers came in on Friday throughout the day, it kept on going up and up and up and up and up. Just for reference point, Star Wars Force Awakens, which I would probably consider the biggest opening of any movie in my lifetime, just because of the hype, that had a $57 million preview gross. The opening day gross was 119, closed out at 247 for the weekend. So the assumption there is that if Endgame had followed a similar sort of path, you were looking at 60 times about 2. You're looking at maybe like a total of a 120-ish or, maybe like a 130-ish opening day for Endgame. That it came in at 156. And that's when we sort of knew that this was a different beast. This wasn't just Star Wars Force Awakens, people waiting, whatever it was, 30 years from the original trilogy or whatever, 20 years something, to see the new one. This was a sort of a culmination of a very recent cultural movement that was happening, where people had to go see this series end in the way that it ended, and they had to see it immediately. And so with the Friday number 156, that's when 300 was a given at that point. And then when the Saturday number came in late last night, it was looking at 107 to 111. That was when the earth essentially like split open. That was that moment. Like what? Where are we? Like, what just happened? Because it is very disorienting, the numbers being this high. I think the rosiest projections for this weekend, you're talking like $310 million. And that was like the outer edge of imagination for people in the industry, for people who've been following the box office. The fact that this is doing $350 million, and that's just the estimate. The reality is they're lowballing Sunday for an $84 million day. That's not going to happen. It's going to be higher than that. So you're looking at the potential of Avengers Endgame breaking the opening weekend record by $100 million. This thing could open at $360 million when the actuals come in tomorrow. And so, it's funny because when I guess 264 and I guess 280, those felt like maybe very conservative or conservative guesses, but they felt like kind of in line with what I was seeing, the data and per theater averages. The fact that this did a per theater average of $75,000 per theater in 4,662 theaters, that makes me go back and kind of rethink how I've always looked at the box office and how I've always looked at movies, because this wasn't in my realm of what was possible. And I think for a lot of people who have been following it for a long time, it's so outside the bounds of normal that they wouldn't even be considered. If you had said 2 weeks ago that Avengers Endgame was going to open at $350 million, you would be laughed at. And you would be laughed at by people who have worked in Hollywood for 40 years. You would have been laughed at by MCU fanboys who think it's the greatest movie ever made, the greatest series of movies ever. They would have laughed at you. You would have laughed by every amateur box office person out there who follows it closely, who has all these numbers and models like I do. You would have been sort of ridiculed for guessing that. And the fact that this movie has done such an outrageous level of business in a single weekend, $1.2 billion worldwide. Like, if we're looking just like, let's just do quick guesses on where this thing could go, I think 350 is way too low for the guess here. I think it's not guess, it's an estimate. I'm gonna say it probably comes in at like 355 actual. We'll just guess that. Infinity War had a 2.6 multiplier, so you're looking at $923 million domestically alone. In terms of what it's going to do worldwide, probably 30% will be domestic versus 70% foreign. Maybe not 30%, probably like what, 40%? I don't even know. But you're looking at probably like $2.2 billion worldwide, maybe higher, or maybe like 2.3 or something like that. And so, I think that there is no real way to track. There wasn't any way to track this coming into the weekend. And I think any attempts that we made to do that were futile. Like, I tried to look at per theater averages. I tried to look at pre-sales. Everybody was doing their best to try and predict and guess what this thing was going to do. But this is the magic of the movie business and the box office and following the box office. This is why it attracts so many different people, because it is so unpredictable. It's like you can get to the point where you can predict what the third weekend drop of this, this rom-com is going to do within like a percentage. You can get to that point and be that good. You can figure out what the multiplier on a Blumhouse horror film is going to be within like 5%. Those are all things that you can do when analyzing the box office. But what makes it so exciting is that every once in a while you'll come across something that is so outrageous and so unthinkable that it really does take every model that you've looked at, every sort of piece of data, and basically throws it out the window. It says none of this matters now. And that's this moment. And this is a moment that really will change, I think, all of the movie industry completely on some level, but it'll certainly change how people view it and people analyze it. Because there's just no model where Avengers Endgame makes $350 million in a single weekend domestically. There's no model that exists. And so now we got to create those models. And I think that's the exciting part. I think this is it's going to be a new phase for MCU, for Disney, it's also a new phase for analyzing the box office, because things will never be the same again. And I think that's what I'm really excited about. I mean, it's an amazing performance to follow. It's so cool. If you think about it, put it in these terms, if it does make $350 million, probably a little bit higher than that, think about that in terms of people who went out to go buy tickets. The average ticket price is $10 now in the United States. Now, for this movie, it's probably higher because it's opening weekend, but let's just use $10 as a reference point. That means 35 million people, or at least 35 million tickets, were sold over the last 3 days. Or 35 million people got into their car, drove to a theater, spent 3 hours. Let's not forget the runtime on this. 3 fucking hours watching this movie. 35 million people. That's essentially like 10% of the US and Canadian population. Compared to that, something like Force Awakens, which I thought was probably like the theoretical limit of what a movie could do. And that was about 25 million people. So 10 million more people got in their car, spent 10, $15 to go see this movie in a 3-day period. Now it's like 10 million people. What does that really mean? Think about it like in terms of like going to like a baseball game. Like the average attendance at a baseball game is about 30K. And so now imagine that full stadium, right? And then, how many stadiums does it take to get to 10 million people? Well, 333 to be exact. So imagine 300 of those stadiums filled with people. That's the additional amount of people that went to go see this over Force Awakens 4 years ago or whatever, 6 years ago, whatever the fuck it was. So that's sort of like, it puts that in perspective. And I think that's where I'm really sort of blown away by it. Because when you think about going to a movie, especially nowadays with all of the options that you have at home, you have good TV, good sound system, and then you have like every movie ever made at your fingertips, depending on what streaming service you have or not, right? But they're all there. To get someone to go out to the theater nowadays is so much more difficult than it was 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago. I mean, it's a completely different business in that sense. And to get 10 million more people to go out over a single weekend than you got for Force Awakens, that's what blows my mind. Because to me, that suggests a completely different cultural movement and moment and phenomenon happening right now than we've ever seen before with a movie. And I think that to me is what is why this is so special. The highest per theater average was 60K, and that was Force Awakens. This is 75K per theater. This means that like they added tons of showtimes. They basically, for a lot of theaters, they ran this movie 24/7 over the weekend. And someone posted a picture on Reddit, on the box office subreddit. I think they were in Mexico somewhere. And they said, hey, this is the lobby when I got out of Avengers at 3:30 in the morning. And it was just it looks like Penn Station. Just like jam packed with people. And that's sort of where it becomes like, oh, this is different now. Like this business is different. If you can get that amount of people to go out and be that excited and spend money all over a 3-day period for one to sit there and watch something on a screen, then the business has changed. It's completely changed. And I think I'll talk a little bit more about how I think it's going to change later in the show, but let's dive back into the numbers and sort of get back into the nitty gritty of what actually happened here. Well, let's talk about the reception, right? Like, it was one thing for the hype. It's the end of the Avengers thing, but is the movie actually good? Critics score from Rotten Tomatoes, 96%. And very impressive, but even more impressive to me is the 8.3 out of 10 here. That is very, very high for a comic book action movie like this. Super high. Audience score, 92% Rotten Tomatoes. Grain of salt, always. Cinema score, A+. I think it's the only third. I think Black Panther and Avengers are the only two other MCU movies going to A+. A+'s are extremely rare in cinema score. You have like maybe a handful a year. So that bodes well for very good legs. It's not like 3x legs. I guess that's possible. I think the real sort of barometer here of the legs, can it hit $1 billion? To hit $1 billion, it's 2.8x legs, or multiplier, I should say, from this opening weekend. I think it's possible. I mean, at this point, I think anything is possible, but I think that that's actually pretty likely that it might hit $1 billion and break the domestic record take here, which is also another amazing milestone. Can we just go back and say that like the $300 million thing felt crazy a week ago, and now it blasted through that by 50 million. It's like I kind of have to question all of these different rules that we had for the box office. I just like multiplier rules, opening weekend rules, drop rules. It's like this thing is just so special, just destroying all of them. Now, the big question is it an outlier completely, or does it start to change how those rules work? I don't know yet. In terms of what the nerds thought with Letterboxd on this one, 4.3. That's probably a little bit inflated. Just because it's opening weekend. Infinity War came in at a 4, or is currently rated as a 4 on Letterboxd. Ultron 3.2. Everybody hates Ultron. I mean, Ultron to me is like not fun to watch. It's like borderline unwatchable for me, but I'm not like one of the biggest MCU fans or comic book movie fans, but it's a tough watch. Original Avengers 3.7, Captain Marvel 3.5, Black Panther 3.8. I think it comes down a little bit, but I think it's probably stays on the 4. Maybe it doesn't. Maybe it stays at 4.3 because people do seem to like this one a lot better than Infinity War. I thought Infinity War was a masterpiece. I loved it. But I gotta go see this still. So definite recommend. This is from, I think, Friday night. This is on Deadline if you want to check this out. This is from Post Track, in-person surveys after the show. Definite recommend was 83% on Thursday night. Now it's up to 85%. That was as of Friday night. 5 stars out of 5 from parents and general audiences. Kids gave it 4.5 stars. Whatever, kids, you're fools. What does the audience breakdown look like? Now this is going to be skewed because it is Friday night. Men under 25, 35%. Men over 25, 28%. Really skewing young. 63% male audience. That's very high. Usually it's like 50-ish to 53% male versus female. A female audience here is only 37%. So definitely fanboy phenomenon going on. The under 25 audience is a lot higher too than I would have anticipated. I can't remember the time I had. It's usually like a 30-70, mostly over 25. For this one, you're looking at a 54, I think. Yeah, 54% under 25, which is extremely high skewing to the young audience. Diversity breakdown, 44% white. Usually it's like 53% for an average movie. 21% Latino is a little bit down than normal. 15% African American, a little bit higher than normal. 20% Asian other, that's way higher than normal. That's like double and then some. So I mean, some interesting stuff there. Men, obviously, and sort of the Asian audience really showing up to this, at least in the US and Canada. Those numbers aside, obviously, like what has helped this a lot, when people say what's been thrown around a lot with this movie is like a perfect storm, and like just a confluence of a lot of different factors coming together to make this really special. I think all of those points are true. Like, you had a really high quality movie that happened here. Critics love it, audiences love it, like there's no really question about it. Audiences probably would have loved it regardless, but the fact that critics are really into it, like even Mark Kermode, who's like the guy on BBC who I listen to all the time, he's a really good critic, very honest and transparent about his opinion. I think he even liked it, cried during the movie, and he's like a kind of a little bit of a curmudgeon type, so that's a very good sign that they did a great job closing this out. And you think about like the other stuff, like it's the end of the MCU story, I guess. I can't give away any spoilers. I don't know that much even what happens in the movie, but like it's the end of things. It's called Endgame for a reason. Like, this is, I think people die, there's characters that are leaving MCU to go on different things, and it's been a 10-year journey and like 22 movies that have been in this cinematic universe, and this is the culmination of all that. So you have a high quality movie, a really special moment for this series of movies that people, it's like that built up audience. I always made the argument, and it was a stupid argument, but I thought it made sense. I always made this argument that like, well, with the cinematic universe, unless you've seen all the films, you're not going to feel like you're really a part of it. And then like, as you build that series out, now it's at 22 movies, like your audience kind of gets smaller and smaller. I guess that's not true. And I guess in this case, it's just different. Or I kind of wonder, like, everybody who's seen Endgame, have they seen every MCU movie? I think the answer is no. And I think they don't care. And it's not about that. It's about the spectacle. It's about having a general idea of what's going on with these characters and then kind of sending them off and saying goodbye to a lot of them. And then, I'm thinking about what else would cause a $350 million opening. I mean, it is so outrageous. It's hard to even wrap my head around. You had high quality film, special moment MCU. What else in the general industry might have caused this? I mean, the year has been terrible so far for movies. I mean, just awful. That's probably a massive factor, because the average person goes to a movie, I think it's like 4 times a year. That's like general moviegoers. They go, if you go to movies at all, you probably go about 4 times a year. Then there's all these other different categories of people. Frequent moviegoers are like people go once a month. They're rare. They're only like 11% of the population or something, but they drive half of all revenue. That's why you had something like MoviePass be so popular. People really do want to go to the movies a lot. It's just very expensive. And consumer confidence has been okay, but the box office has been way down. I think it was down like 18%, I want to say, up until this weekend from last year. And last year was a good year, but it was coming off a bad year, so it kind of looked a lot better than it was. So it's kind of like middling growth overall. And so when you're down 18%, that means a lot of people have not bought their movie ticket for the spring or winter season. Not that they always spread them out, but like if you think about it, they go 4 times a year. They essentially go once a season. And so there's a lot of, I think, pent-up demand to go see something. And I thought Captain Marvel was that movie for a lot of people, but apparently it's not. And this is one of those, Endgame is one of those movies that it gets people who go once a year to go. Right? There's a whole nother swath of people that go once a year, once every 2 years. This is the movie that got them to go out and go see it in the theater. And so in terms of like a record that's going to break, I mean, it basically broke every record you could possibly think of. Obviously, opening weekend, domestic all-time record, it definitely has a chance of doing that. Worldwide opening weekend broke that. I mean, just shattered that. It's got to have, I'm trying to think, like it has like all-time records. I mean, every day it's essentially been smashed by this. I think the most surprising day, it's all surprising, don't get me wrong, but the most surprising part of this run so far has been the Saturday performance, because the previous record for a Saturday was $82 million, which was Avengers Infinity War, and the previous Sunday record was $69 million. So Endgame beat the Saturday record by $27 million. I think it's going to beat the Sunday record by more than they're predicting. They're only predicting a 15, right? Yeah, $15 million increase from Infinity War to Endgame. I think it's going to be like 20. It's going to probably break the Monday record, which is Black Panther at $40 million. I'm hearing that like shows are sold out for the whole week. Don't people go to work? What the hell's going on? Sold out for the whole week. And then, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, obviously the Thursday has been broken. It depends on how they look at that, because they have Revenge of the Sith listed as $50 million on a Thursday, but like, I don't know if that really counts, previews, whatever. Essentially, it's probably going to break most of those single day records. In terms of like internationally, we can just talk briefly. China, biggest opening day ever, biggest single day ever in Chinese history with $107 million. Surpassed Monster Hunt 2, which was a Chinese made film that was huge. So it beat all of those. Single day best performance in Hong Kong, Taiwan, Thailand, Australia, New Zealand, the Philippines, Korea, UK, Brazil, Egypt, Panama, Peru, Colombia, Argentina, Chile, Bolivia, Paraguay, Trinidad, Uruguay. Top opening days in Indonesia, Malaysia, Netherlands, Greece, Portugal, Slovakia, Turkey, and Ukraine. And the only reason I'm going through all those is to say that like this is a global release, a global phenomenon. This is not just localized here in the US and Canada. Like this is a worldwide moment, cultural moment. And I think that that's another brilliant part of what they've built at MCU. It's not culturally locked into North America. Like it plays just as well in Brazil and Egypt. In these countries where, we feel like we have nothing in common with these people, we all go see MCU movies and Avengers movies and love them. I mean, that's kind of crazy when you think about it. Also, like other records, most theaters for one film, at 4,662. So one thing I was kind of in trying to predict the performance of this and trying to get closer, because every single model that I was looking at just didn't make any sense. It's like if I looked at per theater average, and that's what I used to make predictions, it failed completely on me. Obviously, I was with the new theater count, I was like $284 million I thought was going to open at. So I was, essentially $70 million off on an opening weekend. That's being pretty absolutely wrong. And so one thing I was trying to look at last week and doing that preview show, I didn't have enough time to do it, but like trying to look at per screen average versus per theater average, it's very difficult because we get the number of theaters it played in, we don't get the number of screens that it played in, but you can kind of extrapolate. There's about 41,000 screens in the US and Canada. And I think there's like 5,000 something, 5,800 theaters total. Well, I mean, let's look at that just for reference. It played essentially in 80% of movie theaters in the United States and Canada. This was playing, and if you sort of extrapolate that, I think it's not playing on every single screen, but like we can kind of guess on how many screens it played on. There's about 7 screens on average per theater in the United States and Canada, so 32,000 screens it was probably playing on. How many show times? I mean, this is now we're just throwing out numbers, but I think it's fun. How many show times does a single screen do? It's a 3-hour movie, so you're taking, I don't know, but they played it through the night. Let's just say on average they did 4 a day, so like 12 over the weekend. And maybe that's too high, too low, whatever. I think it's a good ballpark. You're looking at maybe like 400,000 plays, 400,000 screenings of this movie over a 3-day period. So like that's kind of like where we're getting these numbers from. It's just outrageous. The point that I'm trying to make is this: there's never been a movie that has played on this many screens over a 3-day period ever in the history, maybe, of film. Absolutely in the history of film. And so that's why it's special. I mean, the thing is, the potential was there. They created that potential by AMC, Regal, all the companies saying, hey, this is going to be massive. Let's add a 3 a.m. show. Let's add a 4 a.m. show. Let's add a 5 a.m. show through the entire weekend. That's actually why it got to $350 million. If they had not done that, it would have capped out way below this. So they saw this oncoming storm. They're like, let's just run this thing over and over and over again. And what's the cost to them at the end of the day? You just keep, your $12, maybe even like $7, $8 employee there through the night, or get like 5 more of them, and you just basically rake in the money. And so, okay, so we've walked through the basic daily numbers, what it did. It's outrageous, it's unbelievable, it's unthinkable. There's not enough, unprecedented. I hate that word, but I have to say it. $350 million opening weekend. There's not much more else I can say about that. And we'll spend the next few weeks analyzing this movie over and over because it is so special. We've talked about the audience scores, the demographics of the film. We talked a little bit about the historical records. Basically, it broke all of them, is the easiest way to put it. The bigger question that I'm concerned about, or sort of interested in right now, is how does this change the industry? How will this upend how movies are made? And in order to do that, we need to take a little bit broader context of what's been going on in the industry over the last few years. Since I've been doing this show, obviously I have a pretty built-up knowledge of what's happened probably since 2016. I do this every week. I look at these numbers constantly, so I have a decent read of that. But on a broader level too, we have to think about like what's been happening with the movie theater business over the last like 20 years or so. One thing to keep in mind is this: the attendance for movies in the box office has been dropping ever since 2002. 2002 was the peak. And admissions, ticket sales have been going down ever since then. In 2017, total admissions for North America dropped to 1.24 billion, the lowest in 23 years. So ever since 2002, which was the peak of the sort of, we'll call it the contemporary modern period of the box office, the number of tickets sold has been going down. So the business is contracting on that sense, which is very, very bad. Obviously, in a hyper-capitalist society, growth is everything. If a business or industry is losing numbers or losing revenue or whatever, that's terrible. And that's what's happening in the box office. But it's interesting. Admissions have been going down, but revenue has not. Why? A little bit. It goes up and down. There's been a pretty steady growth rate in revenue since 2002. How is that happening? Well, you know why. When you go to the movie theater, what do you complain about? The price. The price of the ticket has been going up and up and up. That is what has bridged the gap between the dropping admissions and the revenue. The revenue has not dropped in line with admissions at all, or ticket sales. So that increase in ticket price, and that's why we've also seen the new leather seats, the better food, the better drinks, the alcohol. The environment of going to see a movie has become, it's a luxury now, and they've done that to increase the ticket price to offset the downswing in the number of people going to the movies every year, because it's never, I don't know if it's ever been this low. So that's one thing that's been happening. So the movie theater business on some level is kind of dying on that level on admission sales, or at least contracting significantly. But on the revenue side, it's doing okay because it's sort of been moved up a tier in sort of the leisure economy. When I went to movies in the 90s, it was pretty no frills. Like, you'd go in a big auditorium with like, the seats were like what would be on like maybe like a car seat, like that kind of canvasy sort of fabric. And there'd be a floor would be sticky, and the popcorn was okay, and the Diet Coke was okay, or Coke was okay, whatever. It was not about that. It was about going to see something on the big screen and the big noise, right? And it still kind of is about that. But now you go and it's like the most comfortable seat you've ever been in. You can get like a martini if you want. You can get like a full 7-course meal at like Alamo Draft House or whatever. That has completely changed over the last 15 years. And so just keep in mind that that's what we're talking about in the industry. It is contracting in terms of the number of people going. That to me is extremely concerning if I had a business in this, or if I had a movie theater owner or whatever. On top of that, and the reason that it's contracting, I think the major reason is home entertainment. Home entertainment has always been a threat to the movie theater business. It has been every sort of phase. When TV came out and became popular in the early 1950s, that was seen as sort of like a canary in the coal mine for the movie theater business. And essentially it was. The movie theater business was never the same after TV had been brought into everybody's home, essentially. Because before that, a kid, I listened to my uncles and aunts who are older, who remember the time before TV, and like they would go to the movie theater to be entertained every day. Like literally every day as a kid they'd go, and it was like 5 cents. And so when TV came on, it completely changed the industry. It didn't go away, but it totally changed. It was a paradigm shift. And then when you had VHS and home video sort of take off in the late 70s, early 80s, and then cable TV, the mid 80s to the early 90s, where it sort of became in everybody's home, and then broadband, then internet, and then Netflix. These are all paradigm shifts, but the movie theater business has always survived. This upcoming sort of the rise of streaming over the last 10 years, I think is really going to be similar to the advent of TV, where it won't destroy the movie theater business completely, but it'll turn it into something brand new and completely different. Just to look at the numbers, admission sales at the box office are going down. They have been for the last 17 years straight. They're not going to go up again probably anytime soon. Now, at the same time, parallel to this is the rise of Netflix, Amazon Prime, Hulu. And we're just starting this out. The streaming media world has just gotten started. And it may feel like there's 1,000 different streaming services to choose from. There's going to be 1,000 more over the next 5 years. The biggest launch is coming up. Warner Brothers is launching their own streaming service. Disney is launching their own streaming service later this year for $6.99 a month to basically attack Netflix and undermine them. And then you have Apple TV coming out. I mean, these are the biggest companies in the world launching brand new streaming services that will absolutely eat away at box office ticket sales 100%. And you look at different articles and oh, this might happen. It's going to have a drastic effect on the business. But it's not necessarily going to kill it off or anything like that. What Endgame sort of proves within this context is that people will still go out and see a movie. 35 million people went to go out and see this single movie in the last 3 days. That's pretty magical and amazing that you could get that many people to do something and spend money to see something on a screen. So the theater business isn't going away, but it is going to change a lot. And I think one of the bigger concerns that has come out of, you look at MCU, cultural phenomenon, one of the most amazing things that I've ever seen in the business happen. Nothing in my lifetime ever, especially ever since I followed the box office, even comes close to the impact or power that the Marvel Cinematic Universe has had. And what an amazing feat from everybody in that company to do this year in and year out, produce 2-3 top shelf blockbuster movies that are beloved essentially across the board. Like, it's just like, it's absolutely amazing. But one thing you'll notice at the box office is that it's become kind of top heavy, where the top few films are making so much more money than everything else. Last year, a third of all box office revenue domestically came from just 10 films of the over 700 that were released that year. And there are mostly, it was superhero and sort of animated films that are pulling those numbers up. And this is all from a Washington Post had a really great article about this. I think it was like last December. I'm mostly quoting stuff from that article. So definitely check out the article if you can. In 2009, the top 10 films constituted 30% of over box office. Top 10 films, 30%. In 2018, that number had risen to 36%. There's sort of a wealth gap where a small amount of movies are generating most of the revenue. And let us not forget that, like, the box office was down 18%. Now all of a sudden Endgame has just dropped it. Now it's within 13% of last year. 5% swing on total box office performance domestically by this one film. And so this type of film is going to dominate the movie theater business and has been for a while now. And what's happening is that the mid-tier films and lower-tier films are just getting lost, completely lost. Like, when was the last time you saw like an indie flick do $100 million? And I'm thinking, like, there's some examples like Crazy Rich Asians, not necessarily independent film, but like kind of a smaller film that did do like that level of amazing. Hidden Figures might be another example. But like something from Sundance. When the last time a Sundance movie is at $100 million? That just doesn't really happen anymore. And so everything has floated to the top. And so huge movies like Avengers Endgame, Infinity War, all the MCU movies, they're soaking up all of that box office revenue, and there's not much left downstream for anybody else. Is that concerning? Not for me as like a movie fan necessarily. I think it should be concerning for the movie business, because there is this fear. And this is one of the things that I always bring up on this show. It's like, at some moment, consumer taste will change. Now, it feels silly talking about that now, as Endgame has just done $350 million, has broken the opening weekend record by $100 million. Will do maybe $1 billion domestically, maybe 2.5. Maybe it breaks Avatar's record for worldwide and does like $3 billion. Those are all possibilities right now. So it's a funny thing to say that, like, oh, like, the industry people are worried about what happens when cultural tastes change. But nothing is constant. And nothing's going to stay the same forever. Nothing gold can stay. And so at some point, MCU or DCEU are probably going to be around for infinity, it feels like. But for a lot of lifetimes, it'll probably be somewhat popular. Like, I think about the next 10 years, it's going to be still, both of them are going to be the two top studios trying to making these movies. But at some point, the taste will change a bit. And the worry is that because the industry has become so top heavy, where the top 10 movies are making over a third of overall box office, that the business will sort of collapse with those changing tastes. It's a possibility. And it's a real concern that executives talk about in these articles, always on background. Like, they don't want to give their name, but like, they're worried that if the animated films that Disney puts out start to do poorly, or all of a sudden, let's say after Endgame, the MCU sort of $150-200 million opening as a given goes away. They're very concerned that will lead to a sort of, it was like a housing bubble, but like a comic book movie bubble, that will collapse the industry if it ever sort of loosens up or gets less successful, which is a possibility. Do I think that's going to happen? I don't think so in the near future. It just doesn't seem. I always sort of predicted the demise of comic book movies being like what they are, and they always get bigger and bigger and bigger. And so, the thing, the idea that what goes up must come down. This is just not coming down at all, right? Like there's no. Every single time it just breaks a new record, a new milestone, and shifts the industry in a totally new direction. So those are all fears that they have. There's fear of streaming. There's fear of lowering ticket sales. There's fear that it's become like the Gilded Age of the box office, where if 10 films dominate everything. What's even more concerning, I think, to me than that is that it's one company, Disney, is going to own like 8 out of the 10 top films. They're going to own like 40% of the market share. And that's like monopoly level numbers. That's concerning. But I think when you take a big step back, you think about how Avengers Endgame is going to change the entire industry. I think more than anything, it shows that the movie theater business is thriving on some level. That if you can create something, a story, a visual narrative that hooks people in, that attracts people, that engages people, that they will go out of their way to go see it. They'll pay $10, they'll pay $20 to go see it and spend 3 hours of their life. You think about driving. I just love thinking about like the economics of going to the movie theater, because it's like you get in your car, you got to go deal with people. You're talking half hour there, half hour back, just total travel time and thinking, like focus time. You're talking like for this movie alone, you probably get there 15, maybe half hour before. Now with the assigned seats, think about if you don't have assigned seats at the theater, how early you'd have to get there. You're talking like a 4 to 5 hour commitment for this one thing. And to get people to go pay and see it and do that is such a feat. And the fact that this has made $350 million domestically, and it's $35 million, and look at it worldwide. I mean, obviously ticket prices are totally different in different places. And if anything, it's probably more people than this. But $1.2 billion, and let's just say the average ticket price worldwide, it's not going to be $10. It's probably going to be like, I don't know, 7-ish. You're talking like 171 million people worldwide went to go see this in the movie theater over the last 3 days. So to me, what that indicates is the movie theater business can be extremely successful if you make something that is a spectacle. Spectacles matter now. If it's not a spectacle, there's probably not a good reason why a lot of people are going to go see it in the movie theater. Now, there's always going to be sort of art house and sort of film aficionado screenings and places to go see that stuff. I count myself as part of that group. I will go to movie theaters to see like just old films and stuff like that. That will always exist, but I think the focus of the industry has and officially has switched this week into spectacle. It's a spectacle industry. And if it's not on the level of an Avengers or a DCEU or a Furious movie, then people aren't going to show up. And I think this is going to honestly decimate the lower tier, mid-tier films. Because, think about how much money that Disney is going to make on this. Let's say it does $2.5 billion worldwide. I can just do like the cocktail napkin math here. $2.5 billion worldwide will get them how much revenue? Probably about 2.1 billion in revenue from a single movie. Obviously, there's all this marketing stuff and downstream stuff that they're going to do in terms of like where they're playing it and TV streaming and stuff like that. But essentially, it'll lead to $2.1 billion in revenue. The cost here, I mean, probably $300 million to produce, maybe another, 3x that to market and release. I think total cost maybe like 900 million, 700 million. I mean, I don't know, maybe I'm like talking out my ass, but like I'm looking at these numbers and I'm thinking, does this thing make like, like $1 billion in profit? Is that possible? It kind of, I mean, maybe the cost must have been a lot higher than that, but I don't know. I'm not seeing it. I'm thinking like, it at least does $800 million in profit. That's profit. That's like not revenue. That's profit. And so to me, it suggests that like that's businesses chase profit. And if the profit is at the high end of these huge, massive movies, I think the industry is going to shift even dramatically more towards bigger movies, cinematic universes. This is, and maybe that fails. Like you look at something like Dark Verse, or where the hell it was called, from Universal with the Tom Cruise and the Mummy, that was supposed to start the whole thing off. I think it feels like there's going to be more attempts at doing this now, just because, and I think that's probably the mistake. I think it's a mistake because I think studios will see like, oh, the reason that this is doing so well is because it's a unified narrative universe with all these different films. That is part of the reason why it's doing well. While it's the reason why it's really doing well is that these are really well-made movies. This is blockbuster craftsmanship at its highest form. They have a factory at Disney and Marvel that makes these polished, fun, exciting, action, high adventure movies. That's what they are, and that's why they're doing so well. Just because they're connected, who cares? I mean, that's like, it's an somewhat important part, but that's not why people go. People go because they're super fun movies to watch. And they're really fun to watch with a group of people and an audience. It's like the old adventure movies from like 50, 60 years ago. That's why they're doing well. So if I was in the industry, I'd be like, okay, like I wake up tomorrow morning, this is a completely different business. How do I survive in this business? Well, get rid of your indie films. That's a waste of time. Like there's no point unless you're like an art house film place, or you're or you have a very specific audience in your sort of location that is into sort of cosmopolitan films and art films. If you're not in that, you're in the suburbs, get rid of every single fucking art film you've ever put up. Just forget it. In fact, anything that isn't Blumhouse that's made for under $30 million, don't play it. There's no reason. You focus on these spectacle movies, you add more screens. A lot of that's going to come down to, I think what's also going to change here too, I think one of the things that won't ever be the same, I can tell you right now, is screen times, when screenings are. We saw this with Force Awakens, but this was taken to the nth degree here with Endgame. And this has always been one of my criticisms of the movie theater industry. You have an auditorium and you have a movie. You can play that movie as often as you want, essentially. I don't think there's anything contractual. There might be a little bit contractual stuff. The movie theater is going to get, the studio's going to get half the ticket sales. Probably Avengers are probably going to get like 80% of opening weekend. Doesn't matter. But all you have in terms of capital, you have a screen, you have seats, and you rent those seats out to play this movie, which you can play as much as you want. Why would you limit it to 3 a day? Why wouldn't you just play this thing all the time? It doesn't cost you anymore. What does it cost to have someone turn on a projector and maybe watch over the theater once, twice during a showtime? Next to nothing. And so, I think what we're going to see is that movie theaters are going to become less dogmatic about times and when they show movies. And I saw this in New York. If you haven't lived in New York, they show movies at like 9 a.m., 10 a.m. normally. They don't do that in like the suburbs of Omaha. That might start happening now, where showtimes are just expanded out, where they play movies from 9 a.m. to like midnight across the board. So you get move towards spectacle. I think expanding showtimes overall for the industry, the disappearance of any sort of low budget indie art films from a major theater chain. Just get rid of them. There's no point unless it's like in New York or Los Angeles, and even in a certain neighborhood, it would have to be. And then, I think that like, ultimately it kind of seems like the movie theater business is going to become what happened to music. Because when you think about what happened to music, you follow the entire history of it, CD sales topped out in 1999. It's the best year ever for CD sales. Then MP3s hit. I guess, was it right after that? It must have been, or maybe during that period. And then the entire bottom fell out of that industry. But did the music industry go away? It didn't go away. Now I can stream what people used to pay for $20, $15 for your CD 20 years ago. This is 20 years ago, by the way, not that long ago. $20 for a CD, I can now listen to on Spotify. And, if you think about the cost, it's like minuscule. It's essentially, it almost is free to listen to music now. 20 years ago was the exact opposite. It was a very exclusive thing you had to buy, those rights to listen to it. The movie theater business, but the music business didn't go away, right? What replaced those revenues? Well, you have like 360 deals. What does that really mean? But like live concert going has spiked. At the same time MP3s were taking off, or at the same time MP3s were taking off and destroying CD sales, what was spiking? live concerts. Lollapalooza came back in 2005, and that sparked a whole sort of a whole crop of new music festivals that people go to. Music festival going now is the norm. It wasn't 10 years ago. It wasn't 11 years ago. Now everybody goes to a music festival. Now, why is that? Because it's a spectacle. It's special. It feels special. People will pay money to see something special. They won't pay to hear the newest Vampire Weekend record because that's like a given to them. I sit down, I listen to it. Okay, cool. In order to get them to spend money, you have to create something. Now, if Vampire Weekend came into the city, it's like $30 to go see them. It's cool. It's a whole different experience that's related to listening to it on your headphones. It's in the same universe, but it's a totally different experience. And I think the movie theater industry will be, it would be good for them to focus on what makes going to the theater different. And they've tried it with sort of the seats and the food and the sound. Your home theater will never be as good as the theater that you go to at like a higher end AMC or Regal or Marcus. It's just not going to. The screen's massive. You're never gonna have that big of a screen. The sound costs like $60,000 or $50,000. You're never gonna spend that much money on your sound system, right? So it is better in that aspect. But I think more importantly, what Avengers Endgame shows us is that what is on the screen is most important at the end of the day. And those auxiliary parts of the experience sort of add up to something, but what's on the screen is the central component of that experience that you're having. And so I think the movie theater business, this is kind of the, sort of the last hurrah for anything that isn't super big, super massive. Not like a spectacle experience that you have to see with the loud sound on the big screen. Why would I go see Manchester by the Sea in a theater? Now, I would because I love going to theaters and I love that experience. And maybe there's like 300K people that are also like me in the United States and Canada, or maybe 500K that would go see it. But that's not a main draw. That's not you can't build a mainstream business off of that. What you can build a mainstream business off of is a massive, insane movie like Avengers Endgame, which is essentially like going to see the 4th of July fireworks on a screen. I mean, that's what the experience is like. And so in order for the movie theater business to move forward and survive the onslaught of streaming and home entertainment, they have to stick to what works and what people will spend $20, $15 and take 3-4 hours out of the day to go see, which is a fireworks display like Avengers Endgame. And so it's funny to even bring this up and talk about this because for the last 20 years, as I've been following the box office, this has always been a fear of people, of cultural critics and people who are film aficionados, that like the movie theater business is going to become just all Transformers movies and Avengers movies. And now it is. That's what's going to happen. Like that is, after this performance this weekend, 100% the movie theater business will be for blockbusters alone. There will be some exceptions of smaller movies on smaller theaters. Maybe like, I think what'll happen, and I've talked about this recently, is like, I think there's going to be a movement of sort of community movie theaters where it's a totally different experience than your AMC Regal. And you kind of see that in like Los Angeles and New York. There's these smaller movie theaters that play old movies, that play midnight showings of certain, cult classics. I think that's going to actually take off, but it's never going to be like a mainstream business. It's always going to be kind of a niche business, but it's going to be great for people like me because I love going to the theater. I want to go see like a 1955 movie that I've never seen before. That will sort of, I think, take off a bit. I'll never really break out of that niche though, but I think the 95% of the movie theater business will now become a spectacle game. And it's essentially, that's, I think, Endgame sort of proves that to me. Like, this is the final nail in the coffin of the idea that the movie theater for mainstream audiences is going to have like some high-end art film from France, Avengers, and like a mid-tier, comedy or rom-com. Those days are over. The 90s, that was the 90s. That's dead and gone now. And Endgame sort of is that final nail. And that's good or bad, whether how you view it. I think, whatever, things are always changing and moving forward. If you're an art film snob, you have every streaming service in the world. Criterion Channel launched a couple of weeks ago. I've watched like 6 films on it. It's absolutely amazing. I love it. There's all these old films I haven't seen before that I now can see. So there's like things are always changing. They're getting better and worse in different ways. But I do think the movie theater business that I grew up with is now dead. And it's kind of exciting because it's going to become something brand new. Like, what are movie theaters going to look like in 5 years? Like, everything is going to have like luxury seats. It's going to have like, I don't know, you're going to have like a soda dispenser right there in your seat. Like, it's just going to become so like first class experience. Ticket prices are going to soar. That's another thing that's going to happen. You think the average ticket price listed by the movie theater business conglomerate or whatever is like $10 a ticket. It's going to be like 15 in 5 years. And so ticket prices are going to go up. But I think people are going to get what they want out of it. It's like going to see a concert. It's like $30-$40, even for like an indie band. But if you really want to see them live, you'll pay it. I think that's going to be the same way for movies. And then the people who are into film in terms of like the art stuff, there's other avenues for that. And I think there will be sort of a secondary industry that pops up that will focus strictly on, you know, repertory theater, like community theater and the sort of older movies and art films that you can see on a bigger screen. That will exist. But for the most part, the movie theater business is essentially the MCU world now. It's Avengers Endgame, and that's the future for the next 20, 30 years, I would guess. In any event, sorry, longer episode. Had to. It's a special day. $350 million for Avengers Endgame. I didn't even touch the rest of the top 10. I didn't even look at the list. Everything dropped like 70% or something like that. Captain Marvel did do it. It dropped 11%, did $8 million. It's at 413 right now. But the rest is not really worth talking about. Really interesting weekend, fascinating weekend. We're going to follow Avengers Endgame through its entire run. I don't know. I'm hoping for a 1 billion domestic take on this. I think it can do it. In any event, I will be back next weekend to talk about Avengers Endgame second weekend, and I'll actually walk through the rest of the top 10. All right. Thanks for listening. This has been the Wildline Podcast.